Welcome back to this, the sixth and penultimate of our reflections in our 7 Days of Hope series. I want to look today at the epilogue to John's Gospel. But before we do that, I want to cycle back to the beginning of Luke's Gospel, when Jesus first calls his disciples. Jesus is beside the lake and he's teaching. And he comes across Simon, who's later going to be called Peter, fixing the nets because he's a fisherman. And he asks Peter if he can borrow his boat so that he can teach a little more easily. So Peter gets in the boat and they go out onto the lake, and Jesus continues teaching for a while. And then once Jesus is finished, he says to Peter, "Let down your nets." And Peter says, "Well, we've been fishing all night, we haven't caught anything." But he decides to humour Jesus and he lets the nets down once more. And they're so full of fish that the nets are tearing as they're trying to get them on board. And in that moment, Peter recognises who Jesus is. And Jesus says, "Come, follow me, and you'll fish for people." And now we come to the epilogue of John's Gospel, chapter 21. And Peter and some of the other disciples are sat by the lakeside. And Peter announces, "I'm going fishing." And so the disciples follow him and they go off in the boats out to fish. And John writes that they've been fishing all night and they've caught absolutely nothing. When in the early hours they spot a figure on the shore in the distance. And the figure calls out to them, "Guys, have you caught anything?" They shout back, "No, we haven't caught a thing." And the stranger shouts back, "Let down your nets on the other side." And they decide to humour the stranger and they let down the nets. And they're so full of fish that they're having trouble getting them back onto the boat. And the disciple Jesus loved, John, who's writing this down, realises who the stranger is. He says, "It's Jesus, it's the Lord." And Peter, before anyone can say anything else, grabs his clothes and jumps overboard and is swimming to shore to greet Jesus. In that moment, Peter's back at the start. He's back there in his boat the first time this happened, having pulled all that fish in, recognising who Jesus is. Hearing those words, "Come, follow me." In that moment, Peter is filled with such overflowing love, such hope. There is nothing that's going to come between him and Jesus in that moment. Not even the lake is going to get in the way. I wonder where you were. What happened when you first realised who Jesus was? When you first heard him say those words to you, "Come, follow me." I wonder what happened. I wonder what that looked like for you. Peter had been through so much since he'd first heard those words. The last 3 years had been difficult. He'd been through all sorts of trials. There'd been great highs, but there'd also been great lows. But in that moment, when he recognises again Jesus, when he's catapulted back to the start, none of that matters. He's running to Jesus. I want to encourage you this weekend to take a few moments to reflect on when you first realised who Jesus was, when you first started following him. Whether it was a few years ago, whether it was decades ago. Pray that in reflecting on that, despite all that may have happened in the meantime, that reflecting on that moment would fill you with hope, that you would overflow with love for the one who loves us so much. I pray that it would fuel you, that in these days there would be nothing that could possibly get between you and Jesus. Alleluia, Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia.